to tell a story. The tale, I'm going to make sure I get this right. The tale of two consultants. You're going to love this story because I love it. It was a milestone in my career, taught me a lot. Once upon a time, there was this beautiful government facility that always had a rainbow over it. 330,000 square feet, just over 900 employees, lots of daylight, at the time, maybe a 10-year-old, 12-year-old building. The unfortunate problem is it was a sick building. Letters to the governor, the papers picked it up, and I will say it was the Department of Ecology, so we had ecologists in the building. They sent their own air samples to their own labs. So facilities, imagine being that facility director. So what do? They hired a consultant. This consultant came up with the idea, well, they're having odor issues, they're having allergic reactions, rashes, dizzy, nausea. Obviously, it's the HVAC system, right? So what do? We're going to do a big construction project. We're going to renovate the controls, do a bunch of HVAC renovations. At the end of the day, after spending millions of dollars, nothing. The rainy day for them. No improvement. Nothing changed. So consultant number one decides, which just blows my mind, I'll hire another consultant under me. This consultant came up with a different idea. I want to look at process and I want to look at your procedures. I want to understand your documentation. And the facility director said, yeah, we've got all that. It's in banker boxes in the basement. Paper system. So they had no data. So the consultant said, well, you have to invest in a CMMS system, and you're going to build really good processes, tight processes to capture data so that you can make informed decisions and we can get to the root of what this issue is, because it's creating a lot of absenteeism and a lot of upheaval in this building, and obviously becoming a public spectacle. And it just so happens that the governor used to be the managing director of this department, so it was a real political issue as well. When they launched the CMMS system, from the day they launched it, 90 days after launching it, issue solved. HVAC issue, or the IAQ issue, gone. I put a half sunny day because this client ended up taking CMMS to another level and ended up creating state programs based off of CMMS. I don't have time to get into, but around managed services with vendors and government programs for the state. This was a milestone for me because I saw, this is 22 years ago, and I saw how documentation and data can change the landscape. Because you would think, indoor air quality issue, it's HVAC, but it wasn't. And you're probably wondering what it was. So literally, within 30 days, we found out that 80% of the issues were coming from 3 individuals. We knew what floor they sat in, what bay they sat in, and they sat within 20 feet of each other. They separated them. They followed where the issue went. And at the end of the day, it came down to one person with an allergic reaction to someone else putting on arthritic creams. Literally, that's what it was. So their IAQ issue became, it goes to HR first before it goes to facilities. They research what's going on because that building is so clean. I mean, you go in there to get fresh air. I mean, it's an amazingly clean building. So that was a real lesson for me. I just wanted to share that story because that was a real interesting dynamic and really rather quick way to find out what the root cause was. So I want to get into a little bit on the CMMS, and I'm gonna just share ideas. I've spent the last 22 years working with K12, higher ed, government facilities, primarily quite a bit of commercial as well, large like 20, 30 million square foot portfolio clients on CMMS launches, consulting, and different things. So I'm just going to like throw out a bunch of nuggets for you guys to think about. A lot of organizations think in pie wedges or silos, another way to put it. These certainly aren't all the different organizational aspects to K12. But a lot of times they're thought of in this way of, hey, operations and maintenance, facility management. Now they tend to get the responsibility of CMMS systems. Sometimes it goes to an IT department. IT department doesn't understand facilities to the level that facilities does. But facilities doesn't understand databases as much and software. So the two working together is of key importance. The other thing I would recommend is understanding how these groups play off of each other. Sustainability, I just met with a university recently where a sustainability director doesn't really even meet with facilities. And I'm thinking, they've got carbon reduction strategies in their goals, and yet, sustainability directors and meeting with facilities. I mean, facilities are your low-hanging fruit and your biggest opportunity to reduce carbon footprint. And so just thinking in terms of, instead of a pie wedge, think in terms of a flower. You are all flower petals in some form or fashion. They all overlap. Capital needs maintenance. Maintenance needs capital. They impact sustainability, teacher satisfaction, student engagement, and production and student learning environments. The CMMS, I don't know how that came up a little funky there, but the CMMS system, if it's the system of record, a lot of folks think of it as, well, it houses our equipment and we do our PMs and it just kind of does the day-to-day workflow. Well, I want to throw a few concepts out for you to think of to leverage it across a variety of different groups. I would think of a layered approach. If you're launching a CMMS system or you're evaluating whether your CMMS system is right for you, I would recommend a CMMS charter. A CMMS charter doesn't have to be a 50-page requirements doc. It's a 2 to 3 page at max, kind of a constitution, if you will, of what do we need this system to do? What's the purpose and a business objective of a CMMS system? In healthcare, they have regulatory requirements. If Joint Commission walks in and they say, okay, this motor, show me the maintenance record for the last 2 years and the repair history. If they don't show that, they could get red tagged and could close a hospital. In clinical engineering, even more, like on MRI machines and heart monitors. In the public sector, we just don't have that kind of regulatory requirement. So it's a little looser. But when you build a CMMS charter for the purpose and objective of a CMMS, that helps you identify what you're doing, and then you can build requirements docs from that. And it also allows you to evaluate the current system you have and determine, hey, does this meet our requirements or not? If mobile capability and we're trying to go paperless and we're trying to have certain types of KPIs and reporting for our staff and our vendors, those are things that you're going to want to make sure you have in your CMMS charter. So let's say you decide, okay, we're going to keep what we have, but we want to refresh it, or we're going to go out and pick something different. There's a few layers and just ways to think of it. This next one is infrastructure layout. So let me back up real quick. CMMS salespeople will never tell you the amount of lift that you have to do to implement a system. They will sell you on feature function, which is, that's their job, and some of them are really good at it. And that's great. And we can get wowed by some of those feature functions and the eye candy of cool reports. But just a word of warning, the work is really goes on to the district to get these things set up and running right. And it's one thing to get them set up, but then it's to have good processes to keep them running and operating properly. So the infrastructure layout. So I would go to the nth degree to get all of the infrastructure set up in your system. And that's not just school names, but that's like floors, rooms, suites, mechanical rooms, roofs, fields, tracks, parking lot A, parking lot B, fence, north fence, east fence, gates, you name it. Get the infrastructure of the district in the system, because what you're going to end up doing then is layering your assets, your inventory, and your people in their assignments. So then this boiler serves this area and sits in this boiler room or mechanical room or wherever it might sit. And so then you start peppering in your assets into your database based on the infrastructure that you've laid out in the system. Next, and this gets funky, is operating procedures. So a lot of times districts default to, well, that means maintenance procedures, but think about it in operating procedures in day-to-day. So what do we do with a broken window? Who should it go to first? Are there others in the organization that should be copied? Maybe a principal wants to know about it, but it's going to go to facilities or whoever might be doing window repair, or directly to a vendor if it's an emergency type of issue. What do you do when you get, kid throws up in the hallway, to a plugged toilet, to HVAC call, to an alarm issue? Now I'll talk a little bit about that for a second. Let me go down that rabbit trail. CMMS systems are great for day-to-day operation and for maintenance operation. But you have another database, and a lot of times they don't talk to each other, and that's your control system. You likely have teams of people doing wonderful things in the controls that never get recorded in the CMMS system. They're touching assets, they're touching equipment, they're changing settings, doing reprogramming, and it never gets logged in the CMMS system. So when you pull up the chiller's history, you might see the maintenance, you might see some repairs, but maybe you've touched that chiller 20 times in the last quarter in the controls. And this gets back into another aspect of, so let's say a teacher gets into the CMMS system, hey, I'm hot, I'm cold. And it goes to the HVAC team, and they log into the controls, and they go in, oh, it's a setting adjustment. I make a setting adjustment. They go back to the CMMS, and they go, closed. But what did they do? What did they find? What asset did they touch? And those systems often don't communicate with each other, or they communicate really indirectly, and we don't get the benefit of data in the control system or the actions in the control system influencing what's in the CMMS. Because ultimately, to be able to pull up a chiller's history and see not only maintenance records and repair records, but also see time of day of issues, alarms, how many times you touched it from a control standpoint. And if you have teacher data that oh, that teacher sits in room 104 on the west end of the building, and their work history or their request history is always in the mornings on Tuesdays. Why is that? And correlate that back to controls, back to an asset, something in the settings. But that at least gives you more informed data around how these systems are operating. Operating procedures not only around day-to-day work functions, but also the maintenance, PMs, etc. And then when you get into training, a couple just tidbits. Train the staff when the system's ready to go live. And try to implement this at the end of the school year when you're going into summer. That gives your facility staff time with the system before school starts, and it ramps up. So if you're going to make a change or you're going to hit reset on your current system, I would strongly advise for training to happen in the spring or late beginning of summer, and that gives the facility staff that time, and then you end up going live with the rollout. So I'm just going to pepper you with some different ideas. When you're setting up infrastructure, like I said, get into the layout. That actually can influence where you put your people, like I mentioned, in just like at the Department of Ecology scenario I gave you earlier. We knew what cubicle people were in. Now, that served a purpose for the IAQ, mitigation, but it also serves a purpose for knowing when issues come in, or what location or zone those issues can come in. So back to the controls and whatnot. The other aspect of assets. So we think in terms of MEP oftentimes, and when we do FCAs, primarily for capital planning purposes, right? Hey, we do one every 5 years, every 7 years, whatever it might be. So I'm going to give you some recommendations. In your FCA, there's a couple bullets of scope. Add in your FCA that you would want the provider to provide maintenance plans for every asset they collect. So now you're getting a PM plan with every asset that you've collected. Ask for labor estimates for each task event. So this PM takes 30 minutes, this one takes an hour. That helps with labor planning. And now not only does capital projects get what they need for capital planning, but the maintenance team gets added information that they can just load right into the CMMS system. You can even go so far as to having it into CMMS format for loading into the system, because a lot of the CMMS providers do batch loading. So you can batch load new assets. Another bullet to add into your FCA, develop a process so that you can update data into the FCA and into the CMMS. Now, when FCA providers walk off the district and go back to their office to go put their big report together, by the time they've hit the office, someone's already replaced a motor, someone's already in project replacing a roof, doing something. So build a process in so that data is refreshed, or some forms for them to fill out so that you can then retire the old asset, add the new asset. If there's new maintenance plans tied to that, maybe they put a motor in that only needs maintenance twice a year versus 4 times a year, getting that updated so you can retire the old asset. That will keep your data much more fresh. You may not need to do FCAs as often as you do. Another recommendation on the not the FCAs, but the service procedures. If you think about summers and moves, adds, and changes, and think about where people sit. When teachers move from one school to another, or one classroom to another, there's probably multiple work tickets to be had. There's a furniture move, there's ergonomic adjustments. I want my whiteboard hung over here. Maybe there's even HR related functions, and having HR involved, and payroll, maybe if payroll is done a different way. I'm not sure, different districts do it differently. I got a call from that Department of Ecology 2 years after we launched the CMMS system, and they asked me for a report of who works in what department. And I was like, yeah, I can pull that from the CMMS. They go, because your data is more accurate than our payroll department. We're paying people in different departments because the commodity was space. And so when space planners were moving people from one department to another, they were sometimes forgetting to tell payroll. So people were getting paid in air quality that moved to water quality, or nuclear waste cleanup, or shorelands and environmental. So getting those processes and procedures so that, hey, but we need a new nameplate, Maybe there's something related to payroll, et cetera. So thinking outside of that box. When you're doing the FCA, a lot of times you've got envelope, MEP systems, but how much is flooring? Your biggest asset, your most costly asset in the building is furniture. How much are tracks, bleacher systems, parking lots, parking structures, PMs for, hey, we're gonna resurface and restripe parking lots every 5 years. Oh, it goes in the PM schedule, and you put cost to those types of things. Now your planning in capital planning and maintenance planning becomes more robust because you've got bigger things that might happen every 5-10 years. I've seen certificates of insurance be a part of the program. Sending reminders to vendors, hey, it's time for your certificates of insurance. So thinking of the CMMS from an administrative standpoint is another function. So we just wanted to leave you with that. Just give you nuggets of ways to improve your system. I don't sell CMMS systems, so we're not selling any of that. I could give you all kinds of, this was really hard to put into 20 minutes, I will say. We could go down all kinds of rabbit trails, but I've got Francis with me and Fawn with me as well. But any questions? Are we out of time?
We definitely don't have time for questions, but I mean that in the best possible way. Thank you so much, Rob.